But we're starting off with our second to last claim of Claim 4. Other forms of Christianity were represented in various other writings which have equally as valid a claim to Christianity as the 27 canonical New Testament books. And so we just picked 27 because they were the winners.
But what about the rest of them, right? I mean, they're just as equally valid as the ones that were chosen.
Right? Exactly.
Right? Well, this argument, our authors tell us, makes the false assumption that there's no way to distinguish between the books included in the New Testament and the books that were excluded, right? They're all just the same. There's no difference between them. There's no way to distinguish, that kind of stuff, right? So across the theological spectrum, almost all scholars agree that the materials representing divergent forms of Christianity, for instance, the Apocrypha is what we call it, right, are from the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Well, there is a way to distinguish, right?
They came much, much later. We don't put the Quran in with the New Testament because it came 600 years later.
Yeah, right. So what's more, most of the works carted out in favor of this argument have no conceptual links with the first century, right? So we have time, and then we also have the content of the other books, right?
So the fact is that none of the apocryphal gospels were even ever considered for inclusion in the New Testament canon. It just didn't happen.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, Cicero of Jerusalem in the 4th century specifically warns against the reading of the Gospel of Thomas in churches. And in Origen lists Thomas as one of the apocryphal heterodoxical gospels.
Right.
So if you think anybody would want to read another thing, it's Origen, because, maybe I can draw something from this to use in my odd teaching format. It's Origen, but he says, whoa, even the Gospel of Thomas, we don't want to go there. And it's clear. It's all these are being written and being used, and they're happening later than what the 4 Gospels are. And there's a really good history of why 4 and just 4, and actually not just those 4, but those 4 that are always attributed to the same the gospel
person.
Of. It's really
names are always associated with the same. Conversely, the majority of scholars agree that most, if not all, the New Testament documents were completed by the end of the 1st century, right? So there's the time issue, right? What is left is then our authors want to do is to sketch out the characteristics of these later non-canonical writings to see their lack of historical legitimacy in comparison with the New Testament. So that's what they want to kind of walk us through here. Now, they say that we cannot interact with all the Apocryphal writings here. The response that they're going to give us, though, provides a brief survey of the writings that Ehrman implies are equally legitimate with the New Testament writings, right? So let's see if these books, and there's several here, writings rather, are equally legitimate to New Testament writings, right?
So there's not too many of them because they really haven't survived well because no one really read them. So we don't have a lot, but we do have some. So letters of Ptolemy. A Gnostic wrote Ptolemy's Epistle to Flora in the 2nd century, probably around AD 150, 170, around there.
So it's later in time.
Very later, its writer was committed to the form of Gnosticism in which the Old Testament was not from the true God, but from an intermittent deity, the Demiurge.
Right. Yeah. So here's a different source of the Old Testament. So that's different in content because clearly the New Testament doesn't say that, right? No. They quote from authoritatively from the Old Testament, and they claim that it was the God of Israel who did it. Right.
The New Testament documents also don't have this understanding. This is very, very Greek Roman-esque in the pantheon there to have this kind of demiurge. The author claimed neither to be an original follower of Jesus, which tend to be one of the authoritative sources that the early church looked at, nor a companion of an original follower. So someone like Mark that was transcribing what Peter did, or James, or
so they
Titus,
don't even claim that they're any of these things, right? Yeah.
So there is a vast gulf separating the New Testament and the letter of Ptolemy in terms of both date and content. So a little different.
How about the letter of Barnabas?
Right? The letter of Barnabas. Barnabas is one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
He's an unsung hero. He was rich. He decided to give it up. He went back to his island. He took John Mark with him because John Mark was just a little kid that was tearing him and Paul apart. I love Barnabas, so we should read one of his letters.
So this letter claims to have been written by Barnabas, right? The companion of Paul mentioned in the book of Acts. In fact, it was written in the 2nd century by an unknown author.
Man.
Right? So again, we have the time issue there, right? It wasn't written by a Barnabas who would have known Paul, right?
Right. Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas contains 114 sayings of Jesus. Many of these sayings are strange and esoteric, but some of them sound similar to the words of Jesus found in the canonical Gospels. Several characteristics distinguish Thomas from the New Testament Gospels. So this first, the Gospel of Thomas has no storyline.
Right. He's not telling a story here, right? It includes no account of Jesus' death, or birth, death, or resurrection, right? Just kind of a series of sayings here. Second, the broad consensus is that Thomas was written in the middle to late 2nd century, much later than, the canonical Gospels. Right. And third, at times, Thomas appears dependent on the New Testament material, right?
Right. So Kostenberger and Kruger, Michael J. Kruger, can't get away with saying his name. So they say this in one of their books. It is not surprising then that Thomas is never mentioned in any early canonical list. It is not found in any of our New Testament manuscript collections. It never figured prominently in canonical discussions, and was condemned outright by a variety of church fathers. So it's
don't
not
read
just
this one,
right? So,
but it's just equally valid,
right?
Just don't read it.
Yeah, it's fine. It's good. It can stay in, but let's figure out what's important here. The 4, no, that's not the case. Thus, if Thomas does represent authentic original Christianity, then it has left very little historical evidence to that fact.
Yeah.
So copies, and even the copies we do have, large blanks in it due to weathering, and we just don't have the abundance of different types of manuscripts that we do have with the rest of the 4 Gospels.
Well, how about the Gospel of Philip? Maybe that can help us, right? So the Gospel of Philip was a Gnostic document, likely written in the 3rd century.
Wow.
Right? Certainly long after the time of the apostles, right? Philip was never considered in any discussion concerning canonical books, and there's a vast gulf regarding both date and content between the Gospel of Philip and the New Testament Gospels, right? So Philip has to be out, and it's not equally valid, right?
Gospel of Mary.
Okay,
we know
Mary,
and all her sayings that she's well known for. The Gospel of Mary is another Gnostic gospel.
Gnostic.
Yeah, right. Well, we learned this from Dan Brown, the historian Dan Brown, and the Da Vinci Code, the historic Da Vinci Code. It was written in the 2nd century and has no claim of being based on eyewitness testimony. Moreover, it appears to be developing New Testament material from the author's own, for the purposes of the author's own Gnostic purposes. So again, late, different, not based on eyewitness testimony, anything like that, and
different kind of content,
little weird. So fun stuff.
Well, the Gospel of Nicodemus, surely that fits.
Going back to John 3, most famous. Everyone at a sporting event, instead of holding up John 3:16, needs to hold up Gospel of Nicodemus.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Well, the problem with this one is the Gospel of Nicodemus was likely written in the 5th or 6th century.
Ouch. That was,
so in contrast to the Gospel narratives of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, the Gospel of Nicodemus tells a fictional story of an interaction between Jesus and Pontius Pilate, and of Jesus' actions in hell between his death and resurrection. Right? So the Gospel of Nicodemus is also never mentioned in any of the canonical discussions, and there are no good reasons for affirming the historical legitimacy of the events described in this particular book.
Right.
So it's out.
Right. Very, very late. The survey makes clear that historical credentials are severely lacking from the apocryphal Gospels and letters mentioned by Ehrman. In closing, it is important to mention an important study by Bruce Metzger. Again, this is the well-known, respected scholar that Ehrman was his mentor in Princeton. He worked alongside. He wrote several books with him. He still holds some of the copyright and changes them from time to time, but we won't get into that, which makes the point that these books that in due course were included in the canon were functioning as authoritative before they became part of any canonical list. So what does that mean? We don't need a list in order to say, all right, here's the today in AD 73 on March 2, here's the books here's the Gospels we can use. Yeah. Matthew, Peter. Well, okay, maybe not Peter. We'll put that on the wayside.
So these Gospels were already in use. They were already authoritative. People were already reading them. I mean, It was not that they were somehow selected, right?
Yeah, right. And it assumes this kind of top-down approach of the leaders have declared that these are authoritative. It's no, the church recognized them. So they understood them as God's word, and they were then attributed and understood. And then once leaders or the deacons and bishops and such reference them through different writings, then you can point to it and say, oh, here's a published exterior. Well, they're already being used as Metzger and Ehrman have pointed out before. So it was not an authoritative choice of books that gave them their position. Instead, authoritative books were already functioning as such and recognized as such. And I think Canon Revisited by Michael J. Kruger talks about this. He's responding to different types of canonicitiesness that people have put forward, and he puts his own forward. So it's a good book.
Yeah.
So we did away with all the heretical Gospels and realized that they're far too late. They don't belong with any list.
They don't have the same validity as the New Testament, right? They're late. They talk about different content, right? They're pushing most of them Gnosticism and that sort of thing, right? So, they're nowhere near comparing.
Right.